The stars were on fire. Across the dark edge of the galaxy, in a region known as Sector Phi 9, space itself lit up with chaos as warships clashed like ancient titans. Blue plasma beams cut across black skies. Missiles streaked past shattered hulls. Debris from broken cruisers floated like steel ghosts. Humanity was fighting for its life against the oldest, most powerful empire the stars had ever known, the Zirathi. 1,000 worlds bent their knees to the Zirathi throne, but Earth refused. No one was quite sure why the war had started. Some said we insulted their customs. Others believed we had something they feared. Either way, they came for us. For years, we fought them with everything we had. Fleets of human ships spread out like sparks, holding back wave after wave of alien assault. But we were running out of time and hope. Colonies fell. Mars was evacuated. The Europa line collapsed. All that was left between Earth and the Zirathi Empire now was Fort Tycho, a massive battle station carved into a moon, armed to the teeth, and surrounded by what remained of Earth's shattered navy. On the bridge of Fort Tycho, Captain Jace Monroe stood watching the chaos unfold. The man didn't look like a typical hero. His uniform was half wrinkled. A stogie hung from his lips. Blood from a recent cut stained the side of his face. And yet, behind the sharp eyes and crooked grin, was a mind that had kept Earth alive longer than anyone expected. Once a smuggler, Jace had turned into a commander out of necessity. He was the kind of man who played poker during bombing raids. And right now, he was losing patience. 3 more enemy ships just jumped in, said his second in command, Thyra, a woman who looked far too calm for someone standing in the middle of a dying war. We're outnumbered 12-1. Jace nodded slowly, as if considering it. Then he muttered, "Perfect. Let's make it 13 and even things out." No one laughed. In a last-ditch effort to avoid extinction, Earth's diplomats had been trying to make contact with the Zirathi High Command. For weeks there had been silence, but now, just as Fort Tycho's shields trembled under the next assault, the impossible happened. A signal came through. Every screen on the bridge flickered. And then she appeared, the queen of the Zirathi. Her name was Sira Veilon, and she didn't look like a monster. She looked like a goddess made of war. She wore golden armor that shimmered like sunlight over ice. Her skin was a deep bronze, her eyes bright with ancient starlight. Her voice was calm, cold, and completely in control. "You amuse me, human," she said, staring directly at Jace. "This war is beneath me. Surrender Earth, and I will spare your species." Jace blinked. Of all the things he expected her to say, that wasn't it. The bridge crew watched in total silence. Jace, tired, angry, and bleeding from 5 different places, stared right back. And then he did something no one would have predicted. He laughed, just once, a short, dry laugh. "What if I married you instead?" he said, half under his breath. Lyra froze. Every officer turned to stare. One of the younger techs dropped his tablet. Jace instantly realized what he'd just said. "It's a joke," he added quickly, waving his hand. "Obviously." But the queen did not blink. She tilted her head. Her eyes narrowed. "A bold proposal, Captain Monroe," she said softly. "Unexpected, but intriguing." Jace opened his mouth, trying to backpedal. "Wait, no, I didn't mean—" "I accept," she said, and the screen went dark. For several seconds, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. "You proposed to the alien queen?" someone shouted. "I was being sarcastic," Jace yelled back. But it didn't matter. Across space, the Zirathi fleet stopped firing. Their ships held position. All channels went quiet. It was as if the entire war had just paused. The Queen had spoken. The joke had become real. And Captain Jace Monroe, Earth's last hope, was now accidentally engaged to the most dangerous woman in the galaxy. Jace sat in the war room, silent and stunned, staring at the dark screen where the Zirathi Queen had vanished just minutes ago. Around him, his officers whispered like they were afraid to breathe too loudly. as if doing so might bring the war crashing back. It hadn't sunk in yet. One sarcastic comment, one tired, reckless joke, and now the queen of the galaxy's most feared empire had agreed to marry a human smuggler turned soldier. Lyra leaned against the table with her arms crossed, trying not to smirk. "So," she said at last, "what's the plan, Your Majesty?" Jace groaned and buried his face in his hands. "I'm going to die, that's the plan." But even as he said it, the war hadn't resumed. No more shots had been fired. The Zirathi fleet still hung in space, silent and still, like statues, watching Earth with cold curiosity. For the first time in years, the skies weren't burning. For the first time, Earth had a chance. That chance didn't last long. Within hours, a royal shuttle came out of hyperspace, glowing with gold trim and shields thicker than most battleships. It didn't aim weapons. It didn't send threats. It simply sent a message. The Queen had summoned Jace to her flagship to begin formal bond negotiations. Jace tried every excuse he could think of. He said he was wounded. He said he wasn't noble. He said humans didn't even have galactic marriage laws. None of it worked. The Queen had given an order, and no one, not even Earth's generals, wanted to be the ones to disobey her. "You have to go," Lyra said firmly, handing him a fresh uniform. "For peace." "I'd rather take my chances fighting a fleet," Jace muttered, buttoning the collar. "But sure, let's go talk about weddings with the woman who's been bombing our moons." Escorted by 2 battle cruisers and an uneasy silence, Jace boarded the Queen's royal ship, a floating palace the size of a small continent. Everything shimmered in soft blues and silvers. Alien plants grew in clear glass tunnels. Statues of past Zirathi rulers lined the walls like silent judges. And at the heart of it all was her throne room. Queen Sira stood alone, flanked by guards, in armor shaped like wings. She didn't smile. She didn't threaten. She simply studied Jace with a gaze so sharp it felt like it could peel back his soul. "You joke," she said quietly. "But I do not." Jace tried to answer, but she raised one finger and he froze. "I have ruled 1,000 years. I have crushed rebellions, seen sons die, and watched the strong bend to my will. But none have ever dared propose marriage. Until you." She stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "Explain." He licked his lips. His voice came out smaller than expected. "You were about to destroy us. I thought if I said something crazy it might stall you long enough for us to survive." She tilted her head, considering that. "And what do you hope now?" Jace hesitated. "Now? I hope you don't vaporize me where I stand." That, oddly, seemed to amuse her. A small flicker of a smile touched her lips. "You are clever, reckless, and unbroken," she said. "Rare things in this galaxy." She gestured for him to walk beside her, leading him through a corridor lined with stars and floating crystal orbs. "I will not destroy Earth, for now. I wish to understand your people, and you, Captain Monroe, are my chosen guide." "So I'm... what? Your husband now?" Jace asked carefully. "Not yet," she said, "but the proposal was made. Let us see where it leads." Back on Earth, news spread like wildfire. Every station, every screen, every channel blared the same headline: "Human captain engaged to alien queen." Some people cheered, others panicked. Political leaders argued whether it was a trick. Scientists debated whether love could cross stars. But none of it mattered as much as the truth. The war had stopped, at least for now. And all of it rested on the shoulders of one sarcastic man who had no idea what he was doing, standing next to a being who could destroy planets with a word. Jace had bought humanity time. But deep down, he knew it was only the beginning. The Queen hadn't accepted his joke by accident. She wanted something, and if he didn't find out what that was, and fast, the galaxy's strangest engagement might end with Earth's final breath. The war began again before Jace had time to catch his breath. One moment he was learning how to walk beside the Queen in public without tripping over his own feet, and the next he was standing in the middle of a battle command chamber, surrounded by aliens shouting in 5 different languages. The Council of Warlords, once loyal to Queen Syra, had split, some refusing to accept a human consort, others claiming she'd gone soft. They moved fast, launching attacks on border worlds and disabling deep space relays. Jace barely had time to understand the new map of alliances before the stars were bleeding again. Syra didn't flinch. She stood at the center of it all like a black sun, calm, cold, burning. But Jace could see the tension in her shoulders, the silent grief in her eyes when another city was lost, another convoy burned. He didn't ask what she wanted him to do. He just moved. He studied the war maps day and night, memorized fleet formations, and began suggesting tactics. At first, the other generals scoffed, until one of Jace's emergency maneuver ideas turned a losing battle into a sudden win. Syra backed him, always. Every time she stood behind him, her silence felt like thunder. The alliance between human and Zerathi was still shaky, but now Jace had something solid to offer. Results. They moved together from warship to warship, speaking to alien soldiers who had never seen Earth and only heard stories of humans as chaos bringers, or fools. Jace knew the rumors. They called him the Joke King, the Accidental Prince, and worse. But then he walked into their broken hangars, helped repair ships by hand, and stood side by side with engineers during reactor meltdowns. When one of the Queen ships was boarded by traitors, Jace led a counterattack with nothing but a plasma cutter and 2 unarmed drones, saving 300 crew members. After that, the jokes stopped. They started calling him Ghost Spark. He didn't even understand the name, but it stuck. His bond with Syra deepened, not just in title, but in action. They stopped speaking like strangers. They fought like one unit. When she gave an order, he knew why. When he made a call, she backed it before he even explained. It was a strange thing. Love growing between battle reports, mission briefings, and bloodstains on steel floors. One night, just before a large assault on the rebel shipyards of Gorvael, Jace stood alone in the observation dome of their flagship, looking down at the enemy fleet. Thousands of ships bigger than any human vessel, dark as the void and moving with perfect discipline. The Zerathi rebels were ready. If they won this battle, the Queen would fall, the Empire would splinter, and Earth, still caught in the middle, would be swallowed whole. Jace felt small, just a man, once a cargo pilot, now engaged to an alien, ruler and about to help command a fleet into hell. Syra entered quietly, standing beside him, her presence steady as gravity. "We attack at dawn," she said. "Their flanks are weaker, but we must act fast. You know the risk." Jace nodded. "They're not just fighting for power," he said. "They want to erase the idea that peace is even possible." Syra's voice lowered. "Then we must prove it is." She reached into her coat and handed him a small, dark metal ring. Zerathi design, carved with symbols. "It's yours now," she said. "You don't have to wear it, but you've earned it." Jace held the ring, heavy and warm in his palm, and for the first time the word consort didn't sound like a joke. The next morning, the stars turned red as the fleet jumped into battle. Explosions bloomed across space like fireflowers, and ships screamed in alien tongues as energy blasts tore through hulls. Jace coordinated strike wings with Zerathi captains who once doubted him. He rode shotgun in a stealth skimmer, diving through enemy shields to disable their command corps. Syra led the main charge herself, her voice like a storm over the comms, giving orders that bent the tide. They fought for hours, bleeding space, shattering metal, burning futures. And when the final command ship exploded in silence, Jace watched the pieces drift and knew they had won this round. But something deeper had changed. The rebels were not finished. The war was not over. But now, the legend of the human who dared joke with a queen and then stood beside her in fire was no longer a punchline. It was a warning. Jace walked through the queen's private chambers like a thief in a dream, unsure of what he was doing or how he'd gotten here. The floor pulsed with soft energy beneath his boots, and the air smelled faintly of something sweet and sharp, like metal and flowers. Queen Sira watched him with the same calm stare she always had, unreadable and powerful, dressed not in royal armor but in a long black gown threaded with moving starlight. "You are tense," she said softly. "I wonder if you fear me more, now than when we were enemies." Jace didn't answer. He was too busy trying not to touch anything. One wrong move in this room and he might accidentally trigger a ritual or start a war. But the queen only raised one brow and offered him a seat beside a hovering table set with food, most of it still moving. He sat carefully, trying not to look disgusted. "Why me?" he finally asked. "Out of everyone in the galaxy, why say yes to me?" She poured a glowing drink into 2 cups and handed him one. "Because you made me pause," she said. "In all my years, no one ever dared to speak to me like that. You were not afraid of me, not truly. Or perhaps you were, but still defied me. That is rare." Jace sipped the drink and almost choked. It was cold, thick, and tasted like mint and lightning. "So this is a game to you?" he asked. "Curiosity?" She smiled then, slow and sharp. "Perhaps. But do not think I do anything lightly. Captain, I see strength in you, a spark, and now the galaxy sees it too." The next day, Jace was paraded through the Zirathi capital, a massive, towering city of living stone floating ships and sky bridges that bent like vines across the horizon. Alien crowds gathered to stare at him. Some hissed, some threw petals. Others just stared with wide, glowing eyes. Jace felt like a zoo animal in a borrowed uniform, but Syra walked beside him proudly, never flinching, never slowing. At the central plaza, she made a speech in her native tongue. He couldn't understand most of it, but he heard his name, Jace Monroe, and the way her voice softened when she said it. The crowd listened, then they cheered. Not all of them, but enough to shake the buildings. Jace stood frozen, heart pounding. Somewhere deep in that roar, he realized something terrifying. They were accepting him. Not as a hostage, not even as a joke, as a future king. Later that night, Jace sat alone on a balcony overlooking the capital, stars drifting above him like dust. He had no idea how to rule an empire, or how to survive being part of one. His whole life had been about staying under the radar, fixing ships, running cargo, dodging trouble. Now he was engaged to the most powerful being in the galaxy. He didn't know what scared him more, what she might do next or what he might become. Lyra's face flashed in his mind, and he wished she was here to make one of her sarcastic jokes or tell him to stop acting like the world was ending. But instead, only, the queen came stepping quietly behind him. "You look like a man trying to escape gravity," she said. He smiled weakly. "Something like that." She sat beside him, closer than before. "You think I chose you just to end the war, but peace is a small part of it." He looked at her, really looked at her. Not just the armor or the crown, but the woman beneath, the ancient eyes, the tired strength, the curiosity she tried to hide. "Then what do you want from me?" he asked. She looked up at the stars. "Someone who does not bow, someone who questions me. I have ruled alone too long." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. The silence stretched, but not in a bad way. It was the first time since this whole mess began that he didn't feel like a weapon or a symbol. Just a man sitting beside a woman, both of them watching the same sky. Somewhere far below, ships trained their weapons on Earth, waiting. Somewhere far above, other empires whispered and schemed, unsure what the engagement meant. But for now, Jace had found balance, precarious, fragile, maybe even fake, but balance all the same. He was beginning to understand something dangerous. Queen Syra wasn't just stalling the war, she was testing him. And if he didn't rise to whatever came next, the galaxy wouldn't just lose a strange love story, it might lose its last chance at peace. Victory in the Gorvale battle didn't bring peace. It only made the war deeper, dirtier, more personal. Jace thought maybe the worst was behind them. But what came next was worse than battles in space. It was betrayal from within. They returned to Zirath Prime to regroup, but things felt wrong. The palace halls were quiet, too quiet, and Syra's advisors seemed nervous. Whispers followed Jace wherever he went. A message arrived, encoded in a dead language only Syra and her inner circle used. It warned of an assassination plan, one aimed at both of them. Jace showed it to Syra, expecting anger or panic, but she only stared at the words, then nodded like she had already known. "It started," she whispered, and for the first time, Jace saw her afraid, not of death, but of what came after. They began moving through the palace like shadows, speaking in code, only trusting a handful of guards. But the poison was already in the walls. One night, Syra's food taster collapsed in front of her, foaming at the mouth. That same hour, one of Jace's guards tried to lead him into a trap disguised as a secure bunker. Jace knocked the man out cold and carried him on his shoulder through 2 levels of lockdown before dumping him at Syra's feet. "He said he was saving me," Jace growled. "Saving me from you." Syra's jaw tightened. "The rebels are no longer just in space, they've come home." They launched a hunt within the palace, rooting out spies, traitors, and double agents. Jace watched loyal officers turn cold and weep as they were dragged away in chains. He hated it, hated what it was doing to her, to them. Syra hadn't slept in 2 days. She snapped at generals, walked through walls of danger without hesitation, and buried her grief deep behind her sharp eyes. Jace tried to keep her steady, but the pressure pushed at both of them. One night, after hours of decoding false messages, Syra looked up at him and asked in a small voice, "Do you regret it?" Jace blinked, caught off guard. "Regret what?" "Proposing," she said, barely above a whisper, even as a joke. Jace sat beside her, took her hand, and said, "I regret not meaning it the first time, but I do now." Syra didn't say anything. She just leaned her head on his shoulder and stayed there until dawn. The days after that were a blur of action. A rebel group seized control of one of the orbital defense platforms and aimed its cannons at the capital. The Queen's forces had to act fast. Jace volunteered for the mission over Syra's objection, saying he knew the enemy better now. He led a team through an old cargo tunnel no longer on maps, dodging motion sensors, disabling traps, crawling through freezing air ducts. They reached the command chamber in time to see a rebel preparing to fire on the palace. Jace didn't hesitate. He charged forward, knocked the attacker back, and wrestled for the controls. A single wrong press could have killed thousands. In the end, he jammed the controls with his own wrist unit, locking the cannon's power systems just seconds before it fired. When reinforcements arrived, they found Jace on the floor, bleeding from a blast burn, but smiling weakly. "Tell Syra, she still owes me a dance," he muttered before passing out. When he woke up, he was back in the palace, wrapped in Sirathi healing cloths, and Syra was sitting beside him. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at his face like it was the last star in the sky. Then she said, "I thought I lost you." Jace smiled. "You're stuck with me, Queenie." She laughed, a sound he hadn't heard in too long, and kissed his forehead. That day, Syra called a gathering of the remaining loyal nobles. In front of them, she stood tall, armor shining, and declared that the war would end, not with words, but with fire and truth. "They tried to poison us," she said, "but we are still standing." Then she reached for Jace's hand, raised it with her own, and added, "And we will burn through the lies together." The crowd didn't cheer. They knelt. From that moment on, no one saw Jace as a joke anymore. He wasn't just the human who made a mistake and got lucky. He was her choice, her equal, the man who survived fire and betrayal and stood ready for war again. The throne room had changed. Once filled with polished stone, banners, and tradition, it now held weapons, maps, and whispers of coming war. Syra stood beside Jace, her crown gone, replaced by a battle circlet made of black iron, forged from the ruins of a fallen warship. Across the galaxy, rebel systems were gathering, and at their heart was Admiral Kryn, the same one who once sat on Syra's war council. He now commanded the largest rebel fleet in the sector and had sworn to kill Syra and any who stood with her. The rebellion had grown beyond politics. It had become a war for control of the stars, for power, for blood. Syra and Jace couldn't wait any longer. They had to strike before the enemy gathered full strength. The plan was simple but dangerous. Lure the rebel fleet into open space, away from the planets they hid behind, then crush them between two allied forces, Syra from the front, Jace from behind, hidden inside an asteroid field with a stealth squadron. Timing had to be perfect. If either fleet arrived too late, the other would be wiped out. Jace trained with the Zerathi pilots, learning their ship controls, practicing maneuvers blindfolded, studying their combat patterns until his fingers moved faster than thought. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he was relentless, and that made him a leader they followed without question. The day of the battle came. Zerath's twin suns rose red, a bad omen in their culture, but no one turned back. Syra kissed Jace's cheek before they boarded their separate flagships. "Fly well, my human," she said. Jace nodded. "Try not to blow everything up without me." He took his place in the Shadow Fleet, hidden behind drifting rocks and dead satellites. Silence filled the void. Hours passed like slow breaths until the rebel fleet arrived, vast, black, and bristling with weapons. Kryn's voice echoed across open channels, cold and sharp. "Come out, traitor queen. Let me see the coward who hides behind a human pet." Jace's grip tightened, but he held position. Syra answered with fire. Her fleet lit up the dark, charging in from the front, drawing Kryn's ships into the trap. Explosions burst like stars dying, ships cracking in two, escape pods launching like metal tears. Kryn didn't fall for it immediately. He knew Syra was bold, but not reckless. Still, his arrogance grew when her lead ship took a heavy hit and slowed. He pressed forward. That was the moment. Jace gave the order. His fleet burst from the asteroids like hornets from a nest, targeting Kryn's engines and command ships. The rebels panicked. Caught between two forces, their formation shattered. But Kryn wasn't done. He aimed everything at Syra's ship, willing to die if it meant taking her with him. Jace saw it too late. His engines couldn't reach her in time. So he did the unthinkable. He launched his own fighter alone, flying straight into the path of Kryn's main cannon. The shot fired. Jace's ship twisted in its path, shields screaming, metal melting. He dropped countermeasures, activated a pulse burst, and fired every weapon he had, not to stop the blast, but to knock it just off course. It worked. The beam scraped Syra's hull but didn't destroy it. Jace's ship, though, spun out of control, hit by shockwaves and shrapnel. He crash-landed on a nearby moon, signal weak. Syra's forces rallied, smashed the remains of Kryn's fleet, and boarded his flagship. She met him face to face, no crown, no speech, just a blade through his chest. The war was over. They had won. But Jace was silent. His signal had vanished. Syra searched the battlefield herself, boarding wrecks, calling his name through static, refusing to give up. Then, faintly, from under a broken wing of a downed fighter, a weak signal answered. "You owe me another dance." She found him barely, breathing, face bruised, suit torn but alive. She lifted him out with her own hands and didn't let go the whole ride home. That night, they stood on the palace balcony, no longer queen and consort, but survivors, warriors, partners. The stars were quiet now, the war behind them and the future wide open. "Still think the proposal was a joke?" Syra asked. Jace smiled, wincing. "If it was the best one I ever made." She leaned against him, and for once, there was nothing left to fear. Only the long road of rebuilding together. Peace was never easy, especially after war. The stars that once echoed with gunfire were now quiet, but quiet didn't mean safe. The rebel threat was crushed, yet smaller factions, smugglers, and warlords tried to fill the void left behind. The Zerathi Empire had won the war but was bleeding from within. Its systems were broken, its people tired, and its trust shattered. Syra spent her days with council after council, trying to hold the empire together. Some nobles still hated her for choosing a human. Some still called her weak for loving one. Jace, though, had become more than just a strange outsider. His bravery in the final battle had spread across planets, systems, and species. Even warriors who once mocked him now called him the shield. But fame brought danger. Assassins slipped through cracks. Spies listened from shadows. Some even claimed Jace was using Syra to gain power for Earth. That hurt the most, because Earth hadn't even answered Syra's messages. The human government, far away, had remained quiet, unsure whether Jace was a hero or a risk. He was stuck between worlds, one that didn't want him and one that feared he didn't belong. Still, Jace didn't stop working. He trained young pilots, shared tech knowledge, built new bridges between species. With Syra's blessing, he helped create a new defense wing, the Starbound Guard, a joint force of humans, Zirathi, and other allied races who wanted to protect peace together. For the first time in history, beings from different worlds flew under one banner. It was a beautiful idea, but beauty paints a target. During a routine inspection of a deep space refueling post, Jace and his squad were ambushed. Pirates? No. This was worse. A mercenary fleet larger than expected, armed with weapons stolen from the rebels. They weren't just after resources, they wanted Jace alive. He ordered his ships to scatter, drew fire away from the station, and entered a long, brutal dogfight in the storm of a nearby gas giant. Thunder ripped through the clouds. Lighting danced across his hull and the skies burned with plasma. He shot down 3 fighters before his ship finally took a hit to the stabilizers. With smoke in the cockpit and alarms screaming, he activated his emergency beacon, but the storm blocked the signal. Back on the capital world, Syra received the news late. Her eyes locked on the display, her voice hard as steel. "Ready my ship," she said. Her guards protested. It wasn't safe. She didn't care. She suited up herself, flying not as a queen, but as a warrior. Every moment she had loved Jace came flashing back. His strange jokes, his reckless courage, his stubborn kindness. She would not lose him now, not after all they had survived. She flew into the storm herself, dodging lightning strikes, weaving through enemy fire until she found the wreckage, and the enemy fleet still circling it. She didn't wait. She led the charge, her blade wing fighters slicing through the clouds, her voice calling out commands with a fire that shook even the mercenaries. Jace, inside his ruined fighter, barely conscious, blinked as shapes appeared through the glass. Zirathi warcraft, Syra's personal guard. He smiled weakly. "Took you long enough." They pulled him from the wreck, barely alive but still holding on. Once back in orbit, Syra didn't leave his side. She sat by his bed in the medical bay, holding his hand while doctors worked around the clock. "You always do this," she whispered, brushing dirt from his face. "Run off, nearly die, then smile like nothing happened." He stirred, gave a small cough, and opened his eyes. "You know me," he rasped. "I live for the drama." She laughed, tears slipping down her cheek. They weren't tears of weakness. They were proof of how much one human heart could change a galaxy. Outside, news of the Queen personally, saving her human consort, spread like wildfire. Old enemies took notice. New allies stepped forward. In that moment, love didn't just survive the storm. It became a force no army could break. And in the hearts of people across the stars, a new legend was born. The galaxy had changed, though few realized how deeply until much later. What began as a careless joke between a human and an alien queen had turned into something far greater, something that shifted politics, forged alliances, and cracked centuries-old walls between species. Jace recovered slowly, with Syra at his side through every painful step. Doctors had patched his wounds, but healing the soul was a longer journey. He often stared out the palace windows, looking at stars that once seemed so distant. He remembered being a soldier, a stray pilot with no place to call home. And now he stood beside an empress who had bled and fought for her people, just as he had for his. The universe watched their every move. Diplomats arrived by the dozen. Envoys from Earth finally responded, and old rivals requested peace talks. Some doubted the love, calling it a strategy. Others worshipped it, calling it fate. But for Syra and Jace, it was never about politics. It was about waking up and seeing the person you would die for. It was about shared laughter in quiet rooms, late-night stargazing from palace towers, and the unspoken bond between two warriors who had survived war and still chose to hope. One evening, Syra walked into the war room where generals gathered, voices raised about border threats and rogue colonies. She listened quietly, then raised a hand. Silence followed. "We have fought long enough," she said, "not to grow softer, but to grow wiser." She proposed something radical, the Unity Pact, a new alliance not just between Zirathi and Earth, but any species willing to stand for peace, trade, and protection of the weak. It wasn't a perfect idea. It would take years to build, and many would oppose it. But the moment she finished speaking, Jay stood beside her and placed a hand on the center console. "Let's stop being afraid of each other," he said. "Let's start building something better." That moment was captured and broadcast across the systems. Some laughed, some cheered, but many listened. Within weeks, old ships were recommissioned, not for war, but for diplomacy. Research crews traveled together. Trade opened across star lanes that once saw nothing but gunfire. And above the capital world, a new orbital station began construction, the Beacon, a symbol of shared futures. Their wedding, long delayed, was held aboard that station once its first ring was completed. Invitations were sent to every system. Thousands came. Jay stood in formal uniform, not polished or royal, just honest and proud. Syra wore ceremonial armor gilded in starlight thread, her eyes fierce yet soft as she walked down the glowing corridor. There was no grand speech, no pomp, just a smile between them and Jay saying quietly, "Still can't believe you said yes." She replied with a smirk, "You're lucky I like your stupid face." The whole room laughed and then applauded as the stars lit up behind them. Even hardened warriors had to wipe away tears. It wasn't just a marriage, it was a promise. That across all distance, all difference, love could win. Years passed. The Beacon became a hub for diplomacy. The Unity Pact expanded, bringing old enemies to the table, offering second chances to war-torn worlds. Pirates and slavers found less room to hide. Hope spread, slower than fear ever had, but stronger. Jace and Syra never stopped working. They visited refugee camps, diffused border. Standoffs flew supply runs when they didn't have to. They had arguments, of course, loud ones, sarcastic ones, but they always ended holding each other, knowing they were still fighting for the same dream. Sometimes Jace sat with young pilots and told them how he'd met the Queen. "I was joking," he'd say, shaking his head. "I was a nobody, I was bleeding, half-conscious, didn't even mean it. And she said yes anyway." The younger ones laughed, but also listened closely. Because if a human with no plan and no title could stand beside a queen and help reshape the stars, then maybe, just maybe, they could too. And across the universe, in every dusty outpost and shining city, the story traveled. A tale not of warships or conquests, but of a human who dared to speak carelessly, and an alien queen who dared to answer with hope. It reminded people that the smallest spark could light the darkest sky. That courage wasn't just found in weapons, but in words, in love, in choosing unity when fear seemed easier. The galaxy would never be the same. And no matter what threats rose in the centuries to come, they would always remember the legend of how peace began. With one joke, one heart, and one unexpected yes.